Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now while it's more common to see second-hand Skylake and Kaby Lake PC builds with DDR4 memory, these series of processors actually supported low voltage DDR3 as well. Buying a DDR3 motherboard for say the i7 6700 here may not have been the choice that a lot of tech YouTubers and system builders were recommending at the time, but it did work. It was still early days for mainstream usage of DDR4 after all, even though it had been around since 2012. Think of it as a similar situation to how modern day CPUs can support either DDR4 or DDR5. There's another transitional period going on. This was ideal for OEM system builders because using DDR3 could cut costs, and if we look at this motherboard combo pulled straight out of an HP, it's the perfect example of such a system. From a few articles I found from years gone by, the difference between DDR3 and DDR4 with Skylake in productivity and gaming wasn't that significant, despite being more noticeable in some scenarios. Truth is, in 2023, it's the 4 cores and 8 threads of these old i7s that is the biggest limitation, and it wasn't until the 8th generation chips where core counts increased and DDR4 became the standard that the performance of Intel's lineup really started to become, well, unstale, I guess you could say, in part thanks to new competition put forward by AMD. Anyway, I thought we'd see how the old i7 6700 performs with 16 gigs of 1600MHz dual-channel DDR3 when allowed to stretch its legs with an RTX 3060 Ti. Now I'll definitely have a modern day DDR3 versus DDR4 comparison coming soon, but I can't imagine it makes too much difference, especially not in the latest games. The 3060 Ti is definitely overkill too, but it will highlight any weaknesses of the non-K 6700. So let's get into it and start with our first game, Cyberpunk 2077, where I can imagine this CPU will struggle most. Okay, so here we are. I've gone with the low crowd density option because this is definitely the best choice for quad-core CPUs these days. Not necessarily modern ones, but older ones. So as you can see, the CPU usage has already ramped up to 90%. This is as we are driving down through that busy downtown area. The frame rate is suffering quite a bit. The RTX 3060 Ti is being utilised at about 50 to 60%. Now this isn't an ideal pairing. I spoke a little bit about this the other day when we first took a look at the HP machine that this i7 was inside. I'm still going to find a much better GPU to pair this with, but I thought in this one we take a look at what it could really do when there's not really a limit on its performance. The only thing being the 4 cores, of course, and the DDR3 RAM, if there's even a limitation there. Now at 1080p here, with everything else set to high, it really isn't too bad, apart from a few huge drops in those busier sections, but what I think we'll do now is switch to 1440p to see how performance changes. But first, please give me your van. Thank you. Right, let's move on to 1440p. Okay, so here we are at 1440p with the same settings. Now, of course, the 3060 Ti is still a very capable card, and it's a card that could otherwise handle such settings when paired with a more capable and newer processor. Once again, this is still hitting 90% usage, sometimes more than that, and the game feels a little more juddery. You can see by the frame time graph that there are a few little dips and drops here and there, so it's not the best experience, but the average is still okay. It's just the percentile lows that suffer. Look at that for a handbrake turn. Here we go. Right, as we move up our way down towards this sort of emptier area here, the frame rate is sort of leveling out a bit more, but it's still not a perfect experience. Terrible piece of driving on my part there. Let's move on to our next game, however, and see what else the i7 and DDR3 memory can do. Now please excuse any judders or latency you see with this game. My internet connection is horrible today. I should have wired it up for this test. That has nothing to do with the performance of the i7, which is actually doing okay in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 here with the Ultra preset. Now it doesn't look like it because of the CPU usage, but it is actually holding the card back quite significantly, as you can tell by the low usage of the card. It's hovering around 50 to 60%. The CPU is clocked at about 3.7, 3.8 GHz on all cores, running about 60 degrees, so not very hot, and using less than 50 watts of power at the moment. So it's not very power inefficient, it's actually quite efficient as far as that goes. There will be a few drops here in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Oh, look at that for what was that, a triple kill? Yes. But overall the experience, isn't that bad. So let's move on to 1440p again and see how things change. Now we're playing in a slightly different map this time around, but the frame rate is slightly worse. I actually played 3 games, this is the third one. The footage is from a different map because the maps change all the time. Why did I throw a grenade? I meant to press open door. What a terrible piece of gameplay. I meant to press open door, hit the wrong key, and now I've grenaded myself. Which really happens more often than you think it would when I'm playing this. Absolutely terrible. Another abominacious attempt at being competitive there. But yeah, overall, it's an okay experience for the 6700. Again, just like at 1080p, there will be a few little stutters here and there. Now, Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered is very CPU intensive. You're probably going to notice that the CPU sits between 95 and 100% usage pretty much all of the time. The graphics card really doesn't have too much to do here, running nice and cool in Spider-Man with high settings. 60 FPS is achievable. This will hit at least 60 when we're not really doing much, when we're standing on top of a building or looking up at the sky. Moving our way through the busy city though, well, that will cause a few dips and drops, and this is where you're going to notice the weaknesses of the i7-6700 in 2023. Apart from that though, again, it's running fairly cool, fairly quiet with the HP fan installed. I'm actually quite surprised by the stock cooler that came with the HP. It does a reasonable job at staying fairly quiet and keeping the CPU at reasonable temperatures. This experience is okay, but let's move on to 1440p and see how things differ. Okay, so it's really not bad. The game does look a lot nicer, a lot sharper here, but the performance doesn't really change. I actually find this quite a lot in Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered. The difference between 1080p and 1440p isn't always that much, especially when you're using a CPU that's holding the system back anyway. You can see it's, the GPU is being utilised a little bit more now, as it would naturally do at a higher resolution, but it's still the CPU that is the limiting factor. This is another okay experience. We're really going to suffer here. Yeah, a few heavy frame drops around this park area, but all in all, not terrible. One big stutter there as well to end the gameplay. Alright, so Hogwarts Legacy, yeah, this was, this isn't really good at all, to be honest. I mean, we're using up all of the DDR3 memory straight away. I've only just loaded into the game. It's been about 3 seconds, literally. That's it. And performance isn't good by any means. A lot of stutter. I don't even think we need to test 1440p here because it's bad enough at 1080p. The i7 can't really hold its own here. The 4 cores and 8 threads, not really up to it in combination with the DDR3. We certainly need more DDR3 as well, I think. Still early days for this game really. Maybe a few patches could help with this, but not a very pleasant experience in Hogwarts Legacy, I must admit. Now, I can always count on Forza Horizon 5 to run well. This is a very well optimised game. Although the CPU is still the limiting factor, as seen by both the CPU and GPU usage, this is a very nice experience indeed. We're using the ultra settings here, and the game runs absolutely fine. As you move into those busy city areas, I've noticed that things will drop a little bit more. That's to be expected with this old i7. It's more CPU intensive in those areas, but overall this is a pretty solid experience. Nothing really changes at 1440p, to be honest. I am really stuck here. What has happened? I'm trying to get out of this forested area. It's sometimes hard to tell which trees you can knock down and which ones you're just going to smash your car up on. This one, I don't even know why I thought I could drive through that, but I got stuck on it a little bit there as well. Again, no, performance is really nice. As we move towards this stadium area, it's going to drop a little bit. CPU usage is going to go up. Our GPU is being utilised a bit more, but it's still the processor that's holding us back. As we load up Red Dead Redemption 2 inside of Valentine, again you can see the high CPU usage. This looks really nice. I've gone with the highest balanced preset, which basically combines high and ultra settings. We end up with a fantastic looking game, but we also end up with one that causes the i7 to struggle quite a bit. That was always going to be the case, especially in those city areas. As we move out of these little towns and cities, the frame rate will increase. The 3060 Ti is working a bit harder now, over 90% utilization, but the CPU is still going to be holding us back here. 1440p, well, it's the same result. Of course, the GPU is working a little bit harder now. I'm going to say that this is probably the least sort of bottlenecked scenario. This is the scenario where the GPU has actually worked the hardest so far out of all of today's tests, I imagine. But as you can see, the CPU usage is also quite high, 80 to 90%. So we do still have room for improvement. I think we can still squeeze more, definitely out of the 3060 Ti if it was paired with a faster processor. But you know what, this is probably one of the best experiences with the i7 today, and it feels really nice and pretty smooth for the most part. The percentile figures should also turn out quite well too. All in all then, the i7 6700 suffers from the same problems as pretty much every 2nd gen to 7th gen i7 will do in 2023, the lack of core and thread count. But all in all, I think it's tried its best here. The i7 6700 with DDR3 then. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. If you have one of these chips, let me know how it performs down below, especially if you have the K version, and especially if you use DDR4 and you see much better performance than what I've shown you today. And hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.